Welcome to the Human Origin Project, where we explore the science of you. To keep up to date, go to our iTunes channel and subscribe, and please leave a review if you enjoyed today's show. Hello and welcome to the show. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most famous archaeological sites on the planet. That's Stonehenge. But despite millions of people visiting and countless research papers into what Stonehenge is, what it was used for, where it came from, there's still many question marks as to who really built Stonehenge and why would they go to so much trouble as to align such enormous stone pillars to astronomical features. We explore these topics amongst others in Stonehenge, and really that Stonehenge was a part of a larger stone building culture that existed in the United Kingdom that we can't really explain. I hope you enjoyed today's show, and if you have any questions or research that you think is important to this topic, please write us in the show notes on social media and on our website, and please leave a review if you enjoyed today's show. Hello, welcome to this week's show. Steph, how have you been, man?
I've been good. It's getting a bit colder over here in Australia, which is kind of nice. It's been a very hot summer, so enjoying not feeling the heat anymore.
I don't know, today was pretty hot. It was quite humid. I know talking about the weather is pretty set.
I have Greek heritage, so I feel the heat a lot. So days like today really took me down.
Aren't the Greeks used to heat though?
Oh yeah, maybe.
Maybe it's the other heritage in there. Of your origin. We'll find it. One thing I was going to say though about the weather is that I think it's been quite warm, and I think it's a little bit due to the seasons shifting, which is something that we're kind of writing about, interestingly, the calendar systems and a show coming up. So I thought that was a nice little segue. But today we're going to be talking about Stonehenge, and it kind of goes back to one of our first experiences in the path to working on the Human Origin Project, and that was visiting Stonehenge. And for those that haven't visited Stonehenge, Steph and I were talking a lot about historical research and archaeological and anthropological concepts, and then one day we were in London together, which is quite rare. You were living there, weren't you?
Yeah. It was I don't know, it was a few years ago now, but yeah, I remember it had started off with, I think you sent me a few YouTube videos, the ones you kind of watch really late at night and you got nothing to do, and it says, sort of pops up archaeological mystery, and you click on that and you sort of, I don't know, I just remember buying a lot of books and getting really interested in that topic. And then, yeah, when you came to London, we sort of decided it was, just down the road really. We should go check it out, check out Stonehenge and, yeah, see what all the fuss was about.
Hired a car, got a speeding ticket.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was I can't remember the type of car, but anyway, but we drove to a lot of different sites. But the interesting thing about Stonehenge is that so the Salisbury Plains is a area, it's about an hour and a half southwest of London.
Yeah, it depends how fast you're driving, I guess. But yeah, it's part of I don't know, I thought before we went there that Stonehenge was its own isolated monument, but you drive through the countryside and it's a whole range. There's hundreds of different sites, small and large, different stone circles, dolmens, which are kind of like small versions of Stonehenge on a very simple scale. There's a place called Silbury Hill, which is in the same region, which is just this huge man-made mound that we climbed up as well. And then, there's Long Barrow, which is, there's just all these sorts of, it's like a whole landscape of these ancient sites that all seem to be interconnected in some way. Yeah,
and Avebury is nearby, which is a very famous stone circle.
Yeah, the largest stone circle anywhere in the world. It's got I think there's a village built inside it now. There's a bar and a post office and some houses, and there's only a few stones left standing. But yeah, we're gonna cover this in a future article. What it once looked like is breathtaking. It covers kilometers of space, and it's just enormous.
And could have been part of a bigger complex that was big in itself. Avery's enormous when you think of the size. The stones are kind of massive, unshaped. They're different styles of Stonehenge, aren't they? With their very kind of big clumped stones set up in a line. And what was that? There was like that longer one we went to just before Avery. What was that called?
I think it was High Bennet Longbarrow or High Kennet Longbarrow. Sorry to all the English listeners out there if I've just murdered the pronunciation. But yeah, that it sits right next to Silbury Hill, and it's another kind of anomalous site that seems to be dated to the same period or built by the same ancient inhabitants who no one really knows much about. You know, there's folklore regarding these sites. I think Stonehenge, there's myths about it being built by giants. I think one of the old names for it was the Giant's Dance. For those of you who know about King Arthur and the stories of Merlin, there's an old myth where Merlin was involved in building Stonehenge, you know, using his magic to lift the stones into place. So there's all these fragmentary sort of stories, and no one really knows, you know, who built it or why, or I think people are only just starting to scratch the surface now.
Yeah, that was really when, you know, we were first discussing Stonehenge, you know, looking into the history. My mother is Welsh, so I have Welsh heritage, and it just baffled me that, you know, in the United Kingdom, where, you know, it's one of our, you know, founding kind of you know, ancestry lines, you know, that we don't know where they came from or who were the people that, you know, were based in this land before. It's very strange, isn't it? And, you know, that kind of talks of druids, and we're going to be covering this a lot more later. And, you know, there's a lot of people that research in this area. But, you know, today we're going to mainly go into the site of Stonehenge, but that's just a little bit of a primer for those that haven't been to Stonehenge and the Salisbury Plain. A perspective as you drive along these kind of long grassy fields.
Yeah,
there's a photo of you in the field.
Yeah, it's very quintessential English landscape. You know, there's rolling hills, there's golden sun, lots of sheep, lots of little villages with thatched roofs and smoke coming out of the chimneys, which is very different scenery to what we're used to over here in Australia. But yeah, you're just driving along. The highway is literally, you know, 50 meters from the stones, and you're driving along, and all of a sudden you come to a traffic jam, and 20 minutes later you're rolling, and all of a sudden these stones just appear out of nowhere, and they're huge. And, you know, the people that are walking around them that you can see from the car are just these tiny little dots, and it blows your mind seeing them. It
really does, and the size of the stones really blew my mind. You know, they're kind of that very rough kind of shaped stones. They're a little bit, they're not so fine like you know what you see in Egypt, which is very, very precision cut. It's not like that. It's more of a rough, you know, rounded shapes, but they're just enormous. And, you know, then you think of, you know, some of the size, and they're lifted up and sitting. They're also unique in the style of the sites on the Salisbury Plain, aren't they? Because you have the Salisbury Hill, which is what's said it used to be like a white brick pyramid-like building, which is really unexplained, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's because it's made of. I think it's chalk. There's a lot of chalk in that part of England. Yeah, so there's something to do with the chalk and the colour white, and there's these tales of it, you know, glowing and this sort of thing. But yeah, the Stonehenge is really unique in the area because, I mean, there's lots of stone circles in that area, but also all across the UK and across the world. There's thousands and thousands of stone circles. I mean, we think of Stonehenge as the stone circle, the only stone circle, but yeah, the more that we've been learning, we kind of realise that they're everywhere, almost on every continent. But Stonehenge is different in that it's got these huge stones that make up the circle, but it's a bit more sophisticated than that. There's these they're known as lintel stones that sit at the top. They sort of cap the standing stones on the outside, and they there's only a few left today. But if you look at old images of what it would have looked like, it was this perfect kind of enclosed circle with these three huge standing trilithon type structures in the middle of it. It would have been,
How were they shaped in the middle? What was the?
There's like three, I think they're trilithons. They're just three freestanding kind of stone blocks. And then there are a few other stones sort of dotted around. But they call it, it's like a horseshoe sort of shape of these three large internal stones that line up to certain astronomical bodies on the solstices. And they would have been used in ancient times as sort of observational points or marking points of some sort, I guess.
Yeah, and so there's lintels, isn't there, which are the ones that sit on top?
Yeah.
And what are the stones supporting the horizontal stones called? Is there a name for them or not really? So there's the vertically standing stones, and then the horizontal ones that are laid on top. And so it was originally a circle of these made up.
Yeah, and they're not just placed on top of these standing stones. These lintel stones were carved out in mortar and pestle joins, which are used in woodworking to create sort of complex joins where you don't need screws or nails. You can just sort of put the pieces of timber together like a jigsaw puzzle, and that's what they were doing 3000 plus BC with stone. It's remarkable. Even lifting those stones up to that point would have been remarkable enough, but the fact that they could join them with pretty advanced joinery, especially with stone, it would have been pretty tough to put that together.
Incomprehensible, really. I think they've tried to recreate, and they've used, lots of groups of men and rope and pulley systems to recreate that. But to me, it doesn't really explain, how you go and design a huge, that lever system. What do you call it?
To lift the stones.
The
mortar and pestle joints.
Yeah. So stones of that magnitude in mortar and pestle, with the plan to. It's a huge design. I don't know. I just don't see. Anyway, they've recreated to some point, but they also had issues.
Yeah, I remember watching that documentary, and I think the boat that eventually arrived with the stone ended up sinking because it was too heavy, and they were trying to recreate it to only use, equipment and tools that were available back 3000 BC, and they couldn't do it. So it sort of throws up into the air how they managed to do it, because these stones weren't just around the corner, or they didn't just pick them up from around the local landscapes. They were kind of all taken from very far away places.
There were two types of stones. There were the sarsen stones, which are the bigger ones, which you probably recognise from Stonehenge, and then they were quarried reasonably close. Yeah,
I think it's thought that they were only 20 to 30 miles away to the north of England. But some of these stones, I think, weighed up to 5 or 10 tons, which is, moving that today, people say that it was ropes and lift and huge amounts of people, but trying to move a 25-ton block, it seems very...
Yeah, it's 25 tons. That's enormous.
And not just that heavy, but huge. I
30 feet tall.
Yeah, I think the tallest 30 feet, which is... trying to imagine a stone that big being moved and placed and dragged, dragged along the ground for 30 miles. You would have had to be really sure of what you were building and reason why.
And shaping it in a mortar and pestle, it's unbelievable. Yeah, and the scale. And then to make it more complicated, there are different types of stones called bluestones, which were the ones placed in the middle. And they went to the trouble of quarrying them from a mine in Wales, which is 160 miles or kilometres?
Yeah, 160 miles.
Miles.
Yeah. Which, don't even know where to start with that one.
In a landscape that was quite different back then too, there would have been more forest.
Yeah, so like driving through England today, there's lots of farm and lots of hills, and there's small amounts of woodland and that sort of thing. But back before civilization, in the UK, it would have been dense forest land and lots of streams, and really that area is quite swampy and marshy, and it would have been really difficult to maneuver the landscape and also carry these stones and put them in place. And even I don't even know how they would have carved them.
a huge project, yeah, of people we don't know, and obviously for a purpose that we still don't know. So it just builds to the mystery of Stonehenge, doesn't it? And there's something around the landscape and the relationship to water as well, isn't there? Or the water surrounding.
Yeah, there's
a moat next door. There's a ditch dug around the outside of the complex, and I think I read something on that it lies on the highest point, so it would have potentially been like an island at some point, maybe.
Yeah, there are some. I think there are some people that have talked about the potential. The potential waterways that were nearby, and that Stonehenge sits on the highest point of the surrounding area. So it could have potentially been a place where people would have had to, get to by water, whether that's by boat or by, wading or swimming through the water. But it was kind of this like high place with this megalithic site just placed on top. But yeah, there's this strange connection with water as well. I think Stonehenge, if you drew a line of latitude from Stonehenge across around the Earth, it covers the least amount of land of any other latitude. So you would hit more water than land in that specific latitude than you would in any other one.
It's always strange, those measures. I never know how anyone comes up with that.
Yeah, is it just someone looking for coincidences, or? But yeah, there seems to be some sort of connection to water, and that similar to a lot of other sites, especially in the UK, but also around the world. It seems like they were very specific about where they decided to build. They didn't come across a spot and build there and then drag the stones. They waited until they found the perfect place where, there was a lot of old practices of what we call magic or witchcraft or divination or things talked about in ancient times, and this was really revered by the ancients. So whether that the builders of Stonehenge did that or not, we're still not sure. But there is a really interesting, because Stonehenge wasn't built, the structure you see now of Stonehenge wasn't built originally that way. It was built in stages over, I think, a few thousand years.
Up to 10,000 years, which is interesting for the water, because there's potentially times when water levels may have been higher, maybe not 10, well, depending on, there was obviously fluctuations, but there's timber poles, pine poles in the car park that they can carbon date them to 10,000 years old.
Yeah, which is, you would barely notice they were there when you go to Stonehenge. You sort of enter the site and you walk across the country and you get to the site, and then sort of hidden away in the corner are these old, just in the car park, I think, next to the car park, there's these three sort of flat monuments, just circles on the ground that are representing the stone poles that were once there when they first found the site. And these date back to 10,000 date back 10,000 years, which is the first stages of Stonehenge didn't begin till about 3100 BC.
The outer rim.
Yeah,
right?
So there's this huge span of time where, these poles were either acting as some sort of guide for people to realize that this space was sacred, or this space was important. It's almost like they were marking out the landscape for some future traveler, some future culture who understood the importance of that area would realize that it was a good place to build this site. It's
a huge span of time too. I mean, you were talking 10,000 to 3,150 BC. 7,000 years. So it's quite a huge. Something's going on here for a long time. And the other thing too that I don't really see much on is that there's really no discussion, because 10,000 years ago is a long time, right? And that's long before many of the known settlings in the UK. And so why, what could have possibly been the explanation for that? Yeah,
who did? And it's not just leaving a small stone as a marking. These were huge tree trunks that were either buried, I think they were buried a few meters down into the earth, and they were poking out.
Is there any talk of them being like totem poles or anything like that? Or
I don't know. All I've heard is that they were marking. They seem to be marking the site. But yeah, it's strange because, as we were saying before, the first stages of what is now Stonehenge began construction at around 3150 BC. Dating for it has been really hard because you obviously can't date stone. So it's sort of left to evidence, of bones or of tools or materials that were left behind. But yeah, around that time was when the first there was the ditch that now surrounds Stonehenge was thought to have been dug, and the first of the timber, they were originally timber. Well, they thought that they were originally timber poles that just circled the site. So it was just like a very primitive stone circle made of timber posts, surrounded by this ditch. And then I'm not sure exactly the next steps that got to where Stonehenge is now. I remember seeing it all in the Stonehenge Museum that we passed by a few years ago. But there was about 2,000 years of transition to the site that is today. So there was obviously a big project that had been designed, and there was like a blueprint that was being followed. It wasn't just built and left. It was, the site was marked, the people returned, or the people had knowledge of why this site was important, and then the buildings started beginning. And it's, if you were part of building this site back in Neolithic times, it would have been for us anyway, it's strange to think of starting a project that you're not going to finish in your lifetime, and knowing that it's for a purpose for everyone to enjoy it, even if it's 2,000 years in advance. That seems ridiculous to us now. I can't imagine starting to build my house and saying it's not going to be done for 2,000 years, but someone will enjoy it one day.
Yeah, completely incomprehensible. But also, these kind of trends really do, they echo around the world too. In Egyptian and Mayan and other cultures, there's evidence that sites were built in stages and, on top of each other. Pyramids, the Mayan, many of the pyramids, had bases that were seen to be this marking point of this sacred point where there would be these huge structures, and then similar to Stonehenge. And so you start at 10,000 years in the car park, then you go in this outer ridge that is dated to roughly 3,200 BC, and then 1,500 BC is the final inner. So it was this 7,000 year span, which you don't really hear much about, do you? That there was so much going on. And there's also even other sites around. So there's a Superhenge that's been found, which we'll cover, but that has a much larger ring, the remnants of that was older and larger. And when you connect this all to all the other sites around the Salisbury Plain, it's bizarre to think what was going on and to think we don't know who these people were.
Yeah, and there's a researcher named Alexander Thom who is probably the forefather of the obsession of stone circles and understanding Stonehenge and other sites around England. He spent a lot of his life going to these sites, and measuring every last stone, and measuring the circles, and measuring the distances between stones and the alignments that they faced, and collating all of this data to try and get a picture of why. Because these sites, it wasn't that they were just stone circles all across the UK. Alexander Thom found that all these sites followed the same blueprint in terms of measurement, that you could deduce down, find this common unit of measure that he called the megalithic yard, which I think it's 2.72 feet. And that this measurement is found, all through Avebury, which is that large stone circle we're talking about, all through the stone circles that he found in Scotland and Ireland. Stonehenge has the same measurements. So it seems like while Stonehenge was being built and, as part of this design that spanned thousands of years, these other sites could have potentially been built by the same plan or by the same people, or at least by people who understood this same unit of measure and sort of incorporated that into their culture. It's a really strange thought, trying to imagine these people who we still don't really understand, but we see these remnants of them literally left to us in stone.
And what was his Well, so what's the measurement of? It's 2.72 that they use as a unit of measurement. Do you know how he based to find that?
I think it was just to start. It was just a bit of trial and error, and he's sort of been discredited because he was working back in the days before radiocarbon dating, and so he was trying to date these sites by their astronomical alignments. So if he found measurements and found alignments through those measurements, he would try and determine when they were built, and
so that's how he came up with his unit of measurement too, via astronomical.
Because, because everyone knows that Stonehenge. It's one of the biggest parties in the UK. On the summer solstice, there's 40,000+ people that go there, and there's from early afternoon until well into the night, until the next morning. There's drumming circles and fireworks and people chanting, and there's pagans and druids and people from all walks of life that go and celebrate and wait for the sun to rise on the summer solstice. And it's I've never seen it in my life. I've seen videos and pictures of it, but the sun rises perfectly over this central stone, and it's still so thought-provoking to people today that there thousands and thousands of people go, and it's still so celebrated because it's such a phenomenal thing to see.
And it's growing too, which is quite remarkable that something so old, it's not dying out. This is getting more and more and more popular. They've put a visitor centre in at Stonehenge because of the traffic of people that go there. And then, as you say, the celebrations on this, which may have been similar to what was happening actually when it was being used. But the interest in these sites are growing, which is, Stonehenge is the most popular or most well-known megalithic site in the world. And actually, the Egyptian pyramids might actually be the most well-known, but anyway, it's one of the most.
Yeah, it's one of, when you talk about ancient sites, you say the pyramids and Stonehenge. They're definitely the starting point, I'd say.
Yeah,
but
we're not kind of having these things in history and then kind of leaving. They're becoming more and more. The interest is growing in them, which is really. And we're going to be covering this a lot because, as you said, there's a lot to this history that we don't know, and so it's really, I think, within our interest to understand this more. And it's interesting that the idea of archaeoastronomy and understanding what the people knew that built these monuments, what they were directing to in terms of the astronomical lines, is now much better known. This has been one of the biggest advancements in understanding these megalithic sites, is that they were built with the knowledge and alignment to astronomical bodies. And so the winter solstice, the summer solstice, which marks the longest day of the year in the United Kingdom, is aligned with these stone sets. And there are sites all over the planet that do this, and particularly in Ireland there's some sites that do many, and there's lots of different things they measure, but there's no argument now that megalithic and ancient sites were built with the idea of these astronomical bodies. And there's more, there are more alignments too, aren't there?
Yeah, there's some really interesting alignments with as we've talked about, the summer solstice sunrise. The winter solstice sunset is also very popular among the diehard fans of Stonehenge. They go out there in the freezing cold snow and brave the winds in the English countryside to witness the sun setting on the winter solstice. But also there are these numbers that keep popping up within Stonehenge which point to astronomical alignments. There are the outer stone circle is made up of 29.5 stones, not 30 or 29, but 29.5, which is the number of the lunar month, which seems to relate to the astronomy of the site and how the ancients were following the moon and tracking it in stone, and understanding that this was an important figure to keep note of.
That's remarkable, isn't it, that there are multiple astronomical measurements written into this site, in that It's 29.5 year being the lunar cycle, which isn't a particularly hard astronomical. It's one of the easiest astronomical
but just the fact that you would include that in your like it. I mean, you see the moon fill and then become new and start again, but the fact that they went to so much trouble to encode that into the structure, it's really fascinating to me.
And this is something that we look at with the calendars a lot, but the lunar cycle was far more integrated into people's lives than what they are today. You know, we have a pseudo lunisolar calendar today, where our month is, you know, not based on, you know, we have days of the month which aren't based on any cycle. And so the fact that these people kept more accurate track of the moon than we do is quite interesting, because you don't in your everyday life really think of you know, the lunar cycle. And there are, and we're going to cover this, but there are you know, biological and, you know, geological, you know, it affects the tides of the earth. The lunar the moon itself is a sixth of the gravity influence as to the earth, so it influences all of the bodies of water on earth in tides. And so does this speak of ancient people having, you know, a tighter knowledge of these influences? To me, it feels like they do.
Yeah, and that there are all these old examples in ancient cultures of these numbers popping up again and again. Obviously, the lunar cycle is a big one. As you said, we'll talk about it in a future podcast, but a lot of the earliest calendars are lunar calendars or lunisolar calendars. And
some existing today as well, the Jewish calendars.
Yeah. And so there are, you know, there is a lot of dependence on the cycle of the moon and how that syncs up to your culture and how that syncs up. You know, you base everything's based on time for us today. And if you've got that perfectly aligned in the structure, you know, that really shows how important it is to you know, keep track of and to make sure it doesn't drift and doesn't change. Another interesting number is the number 19, which pops up a lot in you know, in old cult, like the Mayan, I think, have number 19 quite a lot, and in the Chinese calendar have the number 19 as and the 19 in regards to Stonehenge, there are 19 bluestones that make up the horseshoe shape. And 19 is the number of years in the Metonic cycle, which pretty much means that if there's a full moon on your birthday, say today's your birthday and there's a full moon in the sky, on that very same day in 19 years, there will be another full moon. So it's just another way to keep things in sync and, you know, to understand, a way to cast in stone that sort of knowledge to keep track of the very important to the culture that, you know, were responsible for building it. And
of the lunar cycle, we definitely don't consider the Metonic cycle in that, you know, there is this 19-year exact lining up of the lunar calendar, which is, you know, we'll cover that in detail. But so there were 19 stones whether that represented this year. Is that what it was?
Yeah,
the blue stones.
So each year you tick over to the next one, and that's kind of like if you imagine looking at Stonehenge from the top and picture it as a sort of clock with these different spinning axes of information. But there's another interesting number that pops up in the Aubrey Circle, which is the first installment of Stonehenge, where there were these ancient circular holes dug. There are 56 of them, which were heavily influenced in the use of eclipses and predicting eclipses, especially. That's something that is quite complex to describe without images, so I think we'll talk about that. We'll probably have an article about that in the near future. But if you track, like a clock hand does, if you track the sun and the moon around these 56 stones, I think the degree of accuracy for predicting the eclipses is something like 99.4% accuracy, which is, I mean, I don't know when the next lunar eclipse is. I don't think many people you talk to would know, but the inhabitants or the builders of Stonehenge definitely knew and definitely wanted everyone to know, or wanted to encode it for.
There's quite a complex mathematic process to understand. Yeah.
I was trying to wrap my head around it today, but it's pretty in depth, I think.
So it's all written into the stones, which is, that's remarkable that it's this huge calendar system that marks time and astronomical bodies, and, this idea of, our connection to, our solar system and beyond. It's very, very interesting. And, even like, I haven't been there either, but just seeing that sun rise on that summer solstice day and then hitting exactly on that heel stone, it must be a remarkable feeling. And then, these kind of observations can be made all around the world. They were marking this point, for I think it's beyond time too. There must be something significant about that for them to go this much. Because imagine how hard it is, all of those construction metrics that we talk about, the size of the stones, the distance of the stones, the quarrying and carving of the stones, and then to put them into exact alignment in a spot that was marked 10,000 years before. That just goes, it blows my mind as to, what they were thinking of. And, I want to know what they're thinking of, for one, but, two, I think we really need to, really appreciate the complexity of these people.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most important things, just realizing that there is, it's not just some stones standing in on the hillside now. It's this ancient mystery that people are still flocking to. There's millions and millions of people that go to Stonehenge, and something, when you go there and see it, and I'm sure people listening will have the same experience, when you physically are there, you can't actually walk inside the stones, but you get close enough to really feel feel the power of the landscape and the power of imagining what it would have once looked like. It's breathtaking.
There are many mounds around, and we mentioned it's the part of a bigger complex, but there are many mounds around Stonehenge too, and there's also like a large runway kind of. That was the first thing you met with when you start to walk over to the site from the visitor center. There's this huge runway kind of.
Yeah, it's very bizarre. There's like a long flat runway, and there's all these conspiracy theories of people saying it's a UFO landing site, or people saying that it was just it was just for the water to flow down or whatever. But surrounding this are all these strange little knolls and mounds and earthworks of kind of, it looks like Braille writing. Like they're just little clusters here and there dotted around the landscape.
Some say they represent stars too, or?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know much about them. I just know that they are everywhere around Stonehenge, and also around the surrounding areas like Avebury and Silbury Hill, and it's very, it doesn't, no one really knows. Yeah, I mean, there's people talking about that they could have been astronomical, they could represent stars. Yeah, who knows?
Who knows indeed. And, there's a lot to cover on this topic. I think in future we'll cover the other sites like Avebury, and also too, there's an interesting line on who built these sites and going back to these older sites, so we'll be covering that as well. But overall, a lot of years of research has gone to this. Many scientists, many independent researchers, and all these people just visiting the site. We're still a long way from the answer, aren't we?
Yeah, and I think just the fact that there are so many people that have been really looking into this for so long, there is so much out there to go through. So, I mean, yeah, there's almost too much. It's really hard knowing where to turn to and who to talk to about it, because there's just such a wealth of information, but no one is really pulling it all together, which is something that's been really exciting. And talking, I remember when I've actually been to Stonehenge 3 times now, I think, and the second time I went with another friend who knew a lot about the site, and talked me through a lot of things that he'd come across through just talking to friends and through reading old strange books he found in libraries, and talking to the locals. And there's so much information out there, but it's really hard to dig through unless you've got a basis for it, and that's really what we're trying to get down here. And it's really opening up a lot of new questions, but also a lot of new information, which is really exciting. Definitely.
All right, so I think that pretty much covers it, doesn't it? There's going to be a lot more on this topic. So anyone that has anything they'd like covered on Stonehenge, or anything they've particularly read or researched, or would like research, please leave it in the comment section on the social media, and and the website as well. There's an article and on the website with an infographic on the details that we talk about in this in the show, and also in the show notes as well. We'll link to the different references. All right, I think that pretty much covers it, doesn't it? So, what are we going to talk about next week?
Maybe we should talk about the calendar systems. We gave everyone a bit of a teaser.
That was a bit of a teaser, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of stuff to cover.
We could start with our calendar, maybe.
Yeah, the Gregorian calendar. All right, I'm looking forward to it.
See you guys then.
All right, Steph. See you, man.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to today's show. For more information, you can read the full transcript, articles, and discussion on our website, humanoriginproject.com. You can visit us on social media at Human Origin Project on Facebook and The Human Origin Project on Instagram. Follow us on Twitter or join the forum boards and email list to keep up to date with all the new information. And if you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe on iTunes and leave a review, because it helps others to find this information and helps us to bring you the topics you want to discuss and hear about. Until next week, I hope your life is filled with happiness, healthiness, and harmony.